Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
And we're live on match day as Doug reaches for a buffalo wing. He's got it! Oh, and he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! What a finish! There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi.
If you want all of your data in one place, if you want a single home for all of your entities, if you want to spend more time working and less time searching, you need the Intuit ERP. I know because I'm Damon John, and I run my growing business on Intuit Enterprise Suite, the AI native ERP that's powerful, painless, and proven. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Welcome to Generals of World War II, The Art of Command. I am your host, John Viscardo. This is part 2 of our episode on the Battle of Midway, and with me once again are our friends Trent Hone and Jon Parshall. Hello, gentlemen. For those of you not familiar with Trent, a really accomplished author, has a number of books out, including Mastering the Art of Command, and he has another one coming up on Admiral King, I think in 6 months. Is that right, Trent?
Thereabouts. It'll be the spring of next year, spring of 2027.
Okay, and it's not necessarily a biography on him. It's more specific to his World War II service.
Well, it examines command opportunities that he held. So the first half of the book is pre-World War II. The second half is primarily focused on World War II. Because he was Chief of Naval Operations, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Navy, and a member of the Joint and Combined Chiefs of Staff.
And I'll just say for my part, having read portions of Trent's manuscript, it is wonderful, as are all of his books. So King is just this Promethean figure in World War II, and his importance not only in shaping Pacific strategy, but reshaping Anglo-American strategy is incredibly important too. So I think it is long overdue that we're having more, biographies about King coming out.
I will say, pursuant to that, of all our episodes, and this includes episodes on Patton, Bradley, Eisenhower, the one on King has the most downloads of any of our podcast episodes.
Oh, really? How about that?
On John's side, he has a book. He'll hold it up for us. 1942, Crux of War, a 1,000-page behemoth. But it's not just Pacific theater, right, John? It's everything.
It's everything. Yeah, I'm basically looking at how the Allies turned around their dumpster fires at the beginning of that year and kind of, figured out how to do things better and turn the tables on the Axis. So yeah, I'm looking at Pacific, Mediterranean, Eastern Front, strategic bombing, the whole schmear, which is why it is as long as it turned out to be.
It sounds like an excellent book, so please check that out on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Okay, our cliffhanger was we're in the Battle of Midway now. The Japanese have attacked Midway Island. The U.S. have sent fleets of planes up into the sky to find the Japanese fleet, and we found them. So several U.S. torpedo squadrons suffered devastating losses, but their sacrifice drew Japanese cover down to sea level and disrupted enemy formations, which we're going to get into in a minute. But I will say that, is this kind of a Battle of Britain sacrifice where never so much was owed to so few? Why are the torpedo planes so overwhelmed by the Zeros?
Yeah, and we'll talk about mythological aspects of this in just a little bit. I mean, basically, all of these squadrons, first Torpedo Squadron 8, VT8, shows up at 0917 and just gets absolutely massacred. VT6 is going to show up at around 10 o'clock in the morning. Likewise, they're going to lose all but 4 of their aircraft in the course of that attack. These are slow planes. They're coming in at pretty low altitude. They don't have a prayer against the Japanese Zero, and they have no fighter top cover along for the party. And so, yeah, they just get absolutely shellacked by the Japanese. The myth that ends up creating is that their sacrifice was horrible, but gee, it was great that they dragged the Japanese cap down to sea level. That's a yes and a no kind of thing. Yes, the Japanese did have to come down to sea level, but a Zero can climb from sea level back up to 15,000 feet in about 7 minutes flat. And the fact that VT-8 is completely destroyed by around 9:25 or thereabouts, and the dive bomber attack that's going to do in the Japanese fleet does not occur until 10:20 in the morning, i.e. a full hour later. Those Zeros had plenty of opportunity to get back up to altitude, and they most likely did. And you can understand why this sort of a myth would occur, because no one wants to have to look the widow or the mother of a dead American aviator and a war hero in the eye and tell them, your son's sacrifice really didn't do anything. Right? And so you come up with this bromide that makes everybody feel better about it, but it's not actually what ended up happening. What those torpedo planes did end up doing was taking time off the clock, in that they prevent Nagumo from being able to spot his own counterstrike force up on his flight decks, because no way you're going to put aircraft up on a flight deck if you're under attack yourself, right? So it definitely takes time off the clock, but it does not actively like bring the Japanese Zeros down to sea level. That's baloney.
Yeah, I do think that the valuable part of the sacrifice, if we want to call it that, is what you were just describing, John. If I remember right, it's a chart that shows time in Shattered Swords, your book.
Yep.
And so it illustrates how all of these attacks are coming in. And I think it's important or valuable to lump the carrier torpedo bomber attacks in with these other attacks that have come from Midway. And so there's just this whole series of these that are confronting the Japanese carriers over the course of the morning. And so they have to be cycling their combat air patrol, the Zeros that are in the air. And, and that requires deck space because they have to get refueled and rearmed. And so it's buying time. All of these attacks are buying time and delaying the ability of Admiral Nagumo, the commander of the Japanese carrier force, to reposition his carriers for another strike on Midway or a strike on the U.S. carriers, which have now been sighted. The other thing, a point you made before the prior episode, John, that I think is really valuable, is that there is no coordinated cap control for the Japanese formation, right? So a lot of these Zero pilots, I mean, they're very skilled. They know what they're doing. They know their business. But there's no fighter director agent over the entirety of the Japanese force saying, okay, we need, a Shotai over here, and we need another one over there, and you guys have to be at these respective altitudes. Right. So the ability to coordinate those planes that are in the air, that are ready to thwart the next strike, is limited, and it's limited to what those pilots can see or what they might be able to discern over their radio if they have one and if they're listening to it and if it's operational.
That's a huge point, Trenton. You need, I don't know, you call it a Marshal Berthier with Napoleon, but you need someone who's deciding where these units need to be, like you said, for the air forces, where they need to go and how many they need to be there.
Managing the battle space. They have no ability to do that. Really, the Japanese combat air patrol is reacting almost like white blood cells, that they're just, being sucked into, these various threat vectors, depending on some of the surface ships in many cases in the Japanese fleet will fire their guns towards incoming raids to, knock up shell splashes in the water, and that's what's tipping off the Japanese pilots. Oh, I ought to go this way. So what ends up happening as a result of all this, fast forward to the dive bomber attacks that are coming in around 10:10, 10:20, the Japanese sight the third and final of these torpedo plane squadrons, VT-3. This is Yorktown's package. The torpedo planes are coming in separately from Yorktown's dive bombers, but the Japanese see those torpedo planes at medium altitude, 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And so the first Shotai of combat air patrol planes, groups of 3 start scooting over towards the southeast threat vector. And then all the other combat air patrol pilots up in the air are like, well, Kenji's going that way. Maybe I should too. So what you get is this mass of Japanese planes that are on the southeast vector attacking VT-3 and really raking them over the coals. But the other thing that's going on there is there's actually a package of American fighters coming along for the first time. There's 6 Wildcats in that formation, and they end up just acting like a magnet. This is Jimmy Thatch, doing his thing, running the very first instantiation of what's going to be known as the Thatch Weave, and he manages to not get shot down, he and 2 of his wingmen. And so there's a dozen or more Japanese Zeros. I can't figure out why we can't shoot these guys down. The end result of all of this is, all of the Zeros are piled into the southeast, which leaves things open for Yorktown's dive bomber package to come in from the northeast and Enterprise's 2 squadrons to come in from the southwest. And their carrier force at this point is just wide open.
On July 16th, The Hawk lands on Netflix. From the mind of Will Ferrell.
Oh, mama, I'm back!
Comes a new original series.
Get ready, get ready. That's it. Did I stutter?
When an iconic pro golfer
Lonnie,
Honky!
takes one last swing at greatness,
you were a big shot golfer.
I still am a big shot golfer.
no one
Dad, I'm the honk now.
will stand in his way.
That's how it's done.
The Hawk, only on Netflix, July 16th.
With the all-new Dynasty Blueprint in EA Sports College Football 27, you can build your program by earning Dynasty points to spend on NIL, staff, and more. But the fun doesn't end at graduation. With the EA Sports MVP Bundle, get College Football 27, Madden NFL 27, plus Deluxe Edition rewards in both games. Make your rise with the MVP Bundle, available now at EA.com. Rated E for everyone with mild lyrics, user interact, and in-game purchases. Includes random items. Conditions and restrictions apply. See the link for more info.
Yeah, the dive bombers from the USS Enterprise in Yorktown arrive over the Japanese fleet at a critical moment. We were talking in the last episode about the odds before the battle. If you want to even call it 50-50, maybe, but is this when it tips more into the Americans' favor, Trent?
Oh, yeah.
Are we at 80% or where are we now?
We're up there, yeah.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. I mean, it's funny that we talk about odds because I don't know about you all, but I've been watching the basketball finals, and it's always hilarious to watch the odds tracker of the game while it's ongoing, and how many times in recent games it's gone from like 97%, the Spurs are going to win to boom, eventually in the final minutes, the New York Knicks pull it out. I don't think this is quite like that. I think this is sort of starting to track in the U.S. favor. And then when the dive bombers show up, to John's point, it's wide open. Now, the dive bombers had not performed well in the South Pacific, like the Battle of Coral Sea. They had missed a number of times. There are changes with humidity that would fog up their sights as they, came down from higher altitude. So this is not a given that they are going to hit the Japanese carriers and that they're going to do decisive or, fatal damage to them. But it turns out that they do. And it doesn't take a whole lot of bombs to turn the first 3 Japanese carriers into raging infernos. That was something that was always a bit surprising to me. But if you look at it, John in his book Shattered Sword, along with Tony Tully, has a really good explanation for why this is so. Because we talked about it earlier, the Japanese are rearming their aircraft, and they're in the hangar, and so you've got all these munitions in a hangar. You've got gassed up aircraft in the hangar, and so a bomb comes down into that hangar. There's no armored deck above it, but the hangars are also enclosed. Unlike U.S. carriers, right? The U.S. carriers can open their hangars. You can let air flow through them. The Japanese had enclosed hangars, and it's a nightmare once those bombs go off.
What was the Nagumo dilemma, John?
His dilemma is that, I've got planes down in my hangar decks that I want to get up on the flight deck to launch against the American carriers, but I can't do that because I'm under incessant attack. And you got to understand, too, that spotting a raid takes a certain amount of time, like a long amount of time. We're talking 40 to 45 minutes. I got to, pull these birds out of the hangar one at a time, get them back on the fantail, got them chalked down, and then I got to warm up their aircraft engines because you can't just take off. You need good 20 minutes or so to get these things warmed up and ready to go. So from the time Nagumo would say go to the time they could actually get airplanes up in the air is like 40 minutes. And not only that, but when you're doing that process, the whole aft end of your flight deck is shut down. I can't be landing any combat air patrol fighters. And that's problematic, obviously. If your force is under attack, I need to be cycling these Zeros up and down, rearming, refueling, yada, yada. But the net result is that, Nagumo gets caught with all 3 of the carriers that end up getting hit during that time all have aircraft that are gassed up and bombed up and basically ready to go. And so it's just a conflagration just waiting to happen.
Yeah, that was my next question for you, Trent. In just a few minutes, American dive bombers set 3 Japanese carriers ablaze, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, with catastrophic bomb hits. So are these lucky shots, or are the Japanese carriers just more prone to dive bombers in this moment?
Well, I think that's what I was speaking to. They are configured in such a way that they are most vulnerable, right? Because the hangars are full of these aircraft, gassed up, armed up, or there's armaments being shifted around, which could potentially be even worse. And so they are in a uniquely vulnerable state. And then the bombs fall, and enough of them hit. I think the destruction of Akagi is a little lucky in the sense that she's basically hit John, by one bomb more or less. I mean, there's a couple that hit, but there's one that gets into the hangar. And so I'd call that a bit lucky that Akagi is doomed by that singular hit, but she's doomed because of these circumstances. And I forget, is she one of the ones that suffers? Like, I know some of the bombs go off in such a way that they eliminate the ability of the Japanese to sort of block off portions of the hangar and limit the extent of damage.
Soryu is the one that is the worst off in that regard, in that, the Japanese have the ability to have fireproof curtains between their front, middle, and rear sections, and Soryu takes a bomb in each of those three locations. Kaga is absolutely crushed. Kaga was probably hit with more than a dozen bombs of all sizes, so she's verschnuckt. But Akagi is the tricky one, because again, the doctrine said that we should get one hit out of 6, right? Akagi is only attacked by 3 aircraft, and there's only one solid hit, and that is delivered by a guy named Dick Best, who is one of the most experienced dive bomber pilots in the fleet. And so, he comes down and just nails her right in the middle of her flight deck. And exactly to Trent's point, these ships are in uniquely vulnerable positions. You set off the fuel vapors in the hangar or something like that, ba-boom. And Kaga, we know, suffered what's known as a fuel-air explosion. You've got this mixture of large amounts of gasoline pouring out of the fuel mains that are evaporating into the atmosphere, that are being rapidly heated by the ongoing fires, and then they eventually, kick off and just devastate Kaga as a result of that. It's a hot mess.
Yeah, later that afternoon, 4th Japanese carrier, Hiryu, launched counterattacks that heavily damaged the Yorktown before being located and destroyed herself. So how did the action break off, Trent, and did the remaining Japanese retreat, or what was the end game here?
In the prior episode, we had talked about Nagumo's state of mind, and what is he thinking? And I think this gives us some clues into that, because even with, 3 of his aircraft carriers on fire and in a vulnerable state, they're not going to operate again. They're not going to survive ultimately, but he's got one left, and he's thinking, how can I get after the U.S. ships? What can I do to still bring this battle to a positive conclusion? And so he starts thinking about, I can fight a surface action. I'll go find them with my surface ships, my cruisers and my destroyers. We'll be better than they are. And we'll find the U.S. carriers and destroy them. Use Hiryu. He has to transfer his flag, so he's sort of like out of control for a little bit. But the surviving Japanese carrier, as you point out, makes attacks. I think one of the things that's valuable about her attacks is it illustrates how important it was for the Japanese to operate in pairs, right? Because they would pair dive bombers from one carrier with torpedo bombers from another, and then swap. And so her attacks come piecemeal. First she launches his first torpedo bombers, right, John? Or is it the dive bombers?
No, it's dive bombers. She sends up her entire squadron to dive bombers, 18 of them.
So first the dive bombers come over, and then the torpedo bombers come over. So it's not a coordinated attack, but it's enough to do serious damage to Yorktown. But the Japanese think that they've damaged 2 carriers in those 2 attacks. Because Yorktown is able to repair damage from the first before the second arrives, convinces the Japanese that the second strike is attacking an undamaged carrier. So, eventually Nagumo thinks, I can even these odds, until he realizes, this is a bad idea. We are not going to pull this off. Yeah.
Is this throwing good money after bad? Like, you already lost 3 carriers. Should he have just cut off the action?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the way that Hiryu is maneuvered during the afternoon is just one of the things that I look at and just roll my eyes, because there's no question that Hiryu needs to counterattack and has the ability to do so. But one of the advantages that the Japanese have is that their naval aircraft were somewhat longer range than their American counterparts. And so if you'd had an American skipper, running that show, like a guy like Spruance, for instance, I guarantee you, yes, he will launch his first counterattack, but he is going to pour on the coal and try to get Hiryu out to the absolute edge of the engagement envelope. I'll keep punching from that range until I run out of airplanes. But as soon as that happens, bye-bye, I'm out of here. I want to preserve that flight deck. Instead, what you end up seeing is Admiral Yamaguchi, who's the commander of Carrier Division 2, basically tags along in Nagumo's wake with this little surface action group. Hiryu's just couple score miles behind her, which is you're driving this wasting asset into the maw of this enemy that you don't really understand the full dimensions of. And so, yes, by the time in the middle of the afternoon around 4 p.m. or so, Nagumo finally comes to the conclusion, I can't bridge this physical gap to the Americans. I guess it's time to get out of here now. And they start, making their way off to the northwest. Well, it's way too late. The Americans have still got way more scout planes than you do, and they are inevitably going to find Hiryu, and when they do, they're going to wreck her.
And it's also unsatisfying for Nimitz, right, Trent? He gets an erroneous report towards the end.
Yeah. So there's a report that toward the end of the day, that the Japanese are still coming, that their invasion forces are still going to try to seize and occupy Midway. So he sort of draws his defenses, the submarines inward, which is wrong. The Japanese aren't going to try that, and so that makes it more difficult for the other forces that he has to raid. I mean, certainly, Spruance, command of the U.S. carrier forces, is transferred to Rear Admiral Spruance now that Yorktown has been damaged, and Fletcher allows that to occur. So Spruance, gets the carriers out of the way as he should, but Nimitz is still hoping for more to inflict more losses on the Japanese to achieve a greater victory, and so he's frustrated that they withdrew the submarine cordon in, and that there wasn't a greater ability to pursue and follow up on what had been won in the skies.
Let's kind of look at the end calculus here. Japan had lost 4 aircraft carriers, hundreds of aircraft, many highly trained pilots and air crew that could not be easily replaced. So what were the casualties on each side, manpower and ships and planes?
Sure. Japan loses all 4 of its carriers, 248 carrier aircraft, and 3,057 guys killed in action. The Americans lose the Yorktown and the destroyer Hammond, and American casualties are around 307 killed in action. So basically, we killed 10 for 1. And so it's a very bad day at the office for the Japanese. They also lost a heavy cruiser. I should mention that too. There's some mythology around this though too, in that one of the common myths had always been that the cream of the Japanese carrier aviators was wiped out at Midway, and that's baloney. The total number of aviators killed at this battle was 110, which is roughly a quarter of the carrier aviators that showed up to the battle. And in fact, if you look at the 4 carrier battles that are going to happen during 1942, Coral Sea, then Midway, then Eastern Solomons, and then Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz actually ends up killing 148 Japanese carrier aviators, and I think it's at that point that you can really say that as a result of those 4 carrier battles, now at the end of Santa Cruz, which is in October of 1942, now the cream of the crop in terms of Japanese carrier aviators is gone. One of the more crucial losses, I guess I would say, at Midway in terms of Japanese personnel is you've got all of these hangar deck crewmen and mechanics and that kind of stuff. That's a lot of body count there. Kaga loses 800 guys, and a lot of those people are mechanics and whatnot. And they don't grow on trees in Japan. So, yeah, that's a problem.
Because of the U.S. industrial power, Trent, are they able to recover a lot faster than the Japanese from this battle?
Yeah. I want to reinforce a point that John is making, because like the Japanese carrier force, which we've spoken a lot about both in this episode and the prior one, like it's a system. It is a weapons system, and it's 6 carriers. We've talked about the 4, but it's also the other 2 that fought at Coral Sea that didn't come to this battle, Shokaku, Zuikaku, and it took time for the Japanese to craft that, to hone it, to perfect it. We could argue whether it was perfect or not, but to bring it to the state that it had achieved by the middle of 1942. And so Midway wipes 2/3 of that, the best 2/3, off the table. It's not just aviators. Aviators are important, but as John said, more aviators are lost at the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands later. It's everything that goes into it. It's the carriers, it's the crew of the ships, especially those who made the carrier operational what it was, not just the guys in the engine room, but the people who worked on the hangar decks and kept the planes in the air. And they do not have the ability to recreate that system. The Japanese don't. They eventually rebuild some carriers, but it's years. And meanwhile, in contrast, the U.S. system is not as sophisticated. It's more individualized carriers operating with less cohesion, but that allows it to be reconfigurable in a way that the Japanese are not, right? So Saratoga's aircraft are part of the package that Yorktown gets before this battle, because, the U.S. system is more modular. That makes it more resilient in many respects, but it also sets the U.S. up to develop a more cohesive approach to carrier combat later in the war, once the additional carriers join the fleet. So later in the war, or later in 1942, the U.S., eventually suffer losses that are comparable just in terms of aircraft carrier numbers to the Japanese, right? They lose Wasp off Guadalcanal. They lose Hornet at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. So eventually the U.S. Navy loses 4 carriers as well over the course of the year. But they've got, as you say, this industrial capacity, coming online. The Essex class ships have already been appropriated. They're getting built. They start joining the fleet in mid 1943. By 1944, there are a plethora of them and light carriers ready to create, what becomes Task Force 58, later Task Force 38 when it's part of the Third Fleet. And the Japanese have nothing comparable, and they don't have the industrial base to set it up.
I was just going to add on to that. I mean, you can think about the Japanese at the beginning of this war have basically a trump card. If they show up with all 6 of their aircraft carriers anywhere in the Pacific, they are going to be able to demolish any force that we can bring to bear. So what's happened at the end of Midway is they've thrown away that trump card. They'll never be able to get those 4 carriers back at this point. And so now, at the end of this battle, we have this state of parity in carrier aviation that allows us to then, as we said in the first episode, Midway doesn't change the initiative, but it allows us now to actually, reach out and try to grab it for ourselves. That's what's going to happen when we go down to Guadalcanal.
A penultimate question. What mistakes were made on both sides? Let's start with the U.S. first. Trent, what mistakes did the U.S. make in this battle?
Well, I think the greatest mistake is sort of the wastage of the bulk of Hornet's air group, right? We did talk about Torpedo 8. Torpedo Squadron 8 comes from Hornet. They are the only planes from Hornet that find the Japanese carriers. They're the only ones that go to the right place. And for years, there has been some degree of controversy about what happened, where did they go? I think the best answer is, if you look at the U.S. assumptions before the battle, there is a belief that the Japanese are likely to operate their 4 carriers into 2 groups. One that's going to be relatively close to Midway and pound it in order to prepare for the amphibious assault, and another that's going to linger back. And so what I think is most likely is that Mark Mincher, who is commanding Hornet, looks at the action reports that are coming in and takes that information and puts them together, because the first sighting reports say there are 2 Japanese carriers in the formation. So he's like, oh, they're operating exactly as we predicted. There's 2 carriers there, so there's likely to be 2 more, a bit more distant, but along the same line of advance. And the best evidence that we have suggests that he sent Hornet's air group out to strike that 2 Phantom carriers where he expected they would be. But of course, there were no Japanese carriers there. And so the bulk of the air group goes to that empty spot, sights nothing. Some of them run out of gas, some of them make it, but they do little. And there's a controversy in the air because the commander of Torpedo Squadron 8, that's Waldron, right? Yeah. Waldron is basically telling Ring, the air group commander, no, I know where they are. They're, and he's going to head toward where they have been sighted. They argue, and Waldron finds the Japanese carriers.
Well, Waldron commits blatant insubordination in the air. Let's be honest here. I mean, he basically flips the air group commander off and says, I'm going, and he leads his squadron off, and lo and behold, they find the Japanese, like they were on a rope to them. And this is one of the things that I've argued too, that Mitcher, you can blame Yorktown's sinking on Mark Mitcher. Because if Mitcher had followed his orders from Spruance and sent his air group to where they were supposed to go, likely enough, all of Hornet's aircraft would have been the first ones to find the Japanese, would have attacked with their 2 squadrons of dive bombers, probably would have knocked out 1 or maybe 2 Japanese carriers right then and there. 9:17, boom. And then Enterprise and Yorktown's planes come in at 10:20 and they take out the other 2, and we win 4-zip by lunchtime, and the Japanese have no ability to retaliate. And instead...
Yeah. So that and the erroneous report that Nimitz received, also an error. Yeah. But for the most part, performed pretty well. John, I'll let you take the Japanese errors in this battle.
Well, I mean, the first and foremost is just from a battle planning standpoint from Yamamoto and his staff. They viewed the American Navy as this beaten force that was going to have to be lured out to battle, that we're going to have to trail our coats with the invasion force near Midway to kind of entice the Americans out. And this is a complete misreading of the aggressiveness of both Nimitz and Admiral King, who were just absolutely chomping at the bit, waiting to go after the Japanese. So that's kind of problem number one. Problem number two, you've got this erroneous intel estimate, which leads to a scanty scouting plan, which means that you don't find the Americans in time, which means now you're behind the power curve. And big mistake number three, again, as I mentioned, Yamaguchi's handling of Hiryu during the afternoon, I think, is just scandalously bad. And that they could have potentially preserved her as an asset, even in the context of this larger lost battle. You think about some of the carrier battles down in the Guadalcanal theater later on in the year, man, having an extra carrier for the Japanese down there could have been really, really bad for the Americans. And so, yeah, there's a number of lost opportunities there from the Japanese standpoint.
Okay. Final question. The Battle of Midway shifted the strategic initiative in the Pacific to the United States and the Allies, and is regarded as the turning point of the Pacific War. Trent and I discussed Guadalcanal. We think that's more where the momentum shifted permanently for the U.S. So let's start with Trent on this one. What is the legacy of Midway?
I think that it's hard to overstate. I know they've reconfigured the exhibit at the Air and Space Museum downtown on the National Mall. Years ago, you used to go in there, and there was like a naval aviation section, and then within that there was just this great wall devoted to the Battle of Midway. Like, it was sort of the culmination of U.S. Navy aviation. Now, I think things have, they've changed the displays a little bit. Things have moved on since then, but it's held up as this, incredible victory, right? The name of the book. This is how it's seen. It's put on sort of a pedestal. This great achievement, this decisive battle, the plucky, U.S. aviators overcome all these odds that the Japanese could bring to bear. And I think John has done a very good job in the things that he's written about, chipping away at that, not to diminish the achievement, right? But to say, look, this is the odds were not as stacked against the U.S. Navy as oftentimes we assume. Sure, the Japanese have been running roughshod over the Pacific, but, Admiral Nimitz, he put calculation behind this. There's a gamble. Absolutely. There's a gamble. There's a willingness to take risks and take chances. But Nimitz does his work to stack the deck. And I think that, to me, that is a better way to view this, a better way to look at the legacy. It's that you've got talented leadership. You've got a lot of operational intelligence. And then you've got, bold tactical decision-making all coming together, along with a little bit of luck, to ensure this victory that then unlocks the potential, to John's point. The trump card's gone now. Now we can fight, not fair exactly, but on a more level playing field. And that's what Nimitz had been looking for. And so now it's like, okay, let's go. Your decisive weapon is missing. Let's have more of a knockdown, drag out fight and see where we go. And that's the kind of fight that the U.S. now is prepared to win, because it's going to involve attrition. It's going to involve lengthy struggle, and it's going to be more of a battle of sustainable systems, less exquisite weapons.
John?
Yeah, for all that I have tried to push back on the notion of overwhelming odds on the part of the Japanese, and I should say I just hate the phrase turning point. Again, in the context of a global war involving hundreds of millions of soldiers, what the hell does that really mean, a turning point? I don't think there were any single battle turning points in the whole of 1942. I look at 1942 as a whole as being a turning point, but it's this aggregation of little deflection points that lead this enormous animal onto a different path. Anyway, Midway is still by far the single most important naval battle of the entire Second World War, because of what it plops in the laps of the Americans in terms of their ability to change the character of this war. Trent is absolutely right that what the Americans need at this point, I talk about this in the book, is we need a sausage grinder. You know, the war has been, for us in the Pacific, relatively episodic up until this point. You know, there have been a few naval battles. There's been some ground combat in the Philippines. But the way this war is going to have to end is we are going to have to grind the Japanese military into kibble. And we need some place out there in the Pacific, and it doesn't matter where, really. And that sausage grinder is going to end up being created in Guadalcanal. And without Midway, there ain't no Guadalcanal. That's kind of what it comes down to. So Midway is the gift that keeps on giving, because it allows us to set up that sausage grinder months earlier than it otherwise would have been set up. And that means that the war in itself is going to be that much shorter, because we stoke up the attritional machine and get it going.
This is going to be an extremely busy month. I have to watch 104 soccer games, follow the pregame, the postgame, yell useless opinions at the TV. It's a lot. So I knew that when it comes to screening for colon cancer, the choice was clear. The Cologuard Plus test. It can be used at home and can only take 15 minutes, so I can do it during halftime and not miss any action. If you are 45 or older and at average risk, ask your healthcare provider about screening for colon cancer with the Cologuard test. You can also request a prescription at Cologuard.com.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Greater than 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. See terms.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's certain battles, whether it's Stalingrad, Khalkhin Gol, or Midway, where the big bully gets punched in the mouth and you can actually beat this guy in a battle. And I think Midway is like the first naval battle that really hammers that home.
Yeah, it's a game changer from that respect, for sure.
Yeah, it is. And I think John and I are very close to the military history of it, you know, so we're looking at it through the lens of how both sides thought about operations and strategy and so on. One of the things that I think it's important not to neglect is how, like, U.S. citizenry viewed this, right? So for them, this is a big deal, right? Because now it's a significant victory that can be pointed to. You know, previously the major victories in the Pacific, they're all Japanese. They belong to the enemy. You know, the Philippines are isolated and fall. Singapore falls. Ceylon, modern day Sri Lanka, gets attacked. The British fleet withdraws all the way to the west coast of Africa. Who's going to stop the Japanese? Oh, they're going to come to Midway, and boom, they got stopped. And so from a public perspective, in terms of the information that is available in newspapers at the time, it would not surprise me if it's viewed that way, as a turning point, because previously the Japanese were on roughshod. Now there's the potential that, you know, they've gotten their nose bloodied, and there's the potential to begin, you know, to assume the offensive. So I think we shouldn't diminish that. But in terms of, you know, what's going on behind the scenes militarily, I do think it's important to be more cautious.
But you wonder if that's where the public image comes from. Instead of newspapers writing, hey, we want a battle at Midway where the odds are pretty even, it's more, we want a miracle victory at Midway. And that's where it came from.
Well, and this speaks to a larger issue just from a qualitative standpoint. The first 6 months of this war makes the Allied war machines look like a bunch of Keystone Cops. You know, we're just getting run over by these guys. And so there's an open question here in the part of, you know, the average man or woman on the street. Can we stand up to these guys? Are our boys good enough to fight their boys, you know? And Midway is one of the first indications that, yeah, actually our carrier aviators actually know what the heck they're doing. And we can visibly punch these guys in the face and show the American people that, yeah, we have good forces.
Yeah, a crucial element into that, and now this did bleed into military decision-making, but I think also probably a great deal in the public arena, is just the shock at what the Japanese proved to be capable of in December 1941 and in the following months, right? So Allied war plans are assuming the Japanese, yeah, maybe they'll take the Philippines. They're probably not going to capture Singapore. They're probably not going to get past the Malay Barrier. We're going to confine them to the Dutch East Indies, and that'll be that. And then we'll assume the offensive. You know, we'll build up forces and we'll take the war to them, and we will win. And it doesn't play out that way all. So there's this shock. Now, some of that shock does influence some of the military decision makers, but I think the public shock is probably much greater, leading to the doubts that John was just alluding to. Can our boys actually do this? Are our admirals and generals good enough to win this fight? Why? We've been sold that, we have a fairly sophisticated Navy. Why can't it perform? And then all of a sudden, in early June, it does. Sigh of relief. We can actually win.
Yeah, that's a great way to wrap up. Again, we appreciate Jon Parshall and Trent Hone joining us. Please check out John's book, 1942 Crux of War, and Trent's book, Mastering the Art of Command. And we thank both gentlemen for their time today.
Stitch Fix. Stop shopping, get styled.
A+ on the outfit, Miss Turner. You are about to slay parent-teacher conferences.
Oh, these? Just the most perfect fitting jeans my stylist sent me.
Oh, hello, you, who didn't set one foot in a mall and still looks amazing.
Just share your size, style, and budget, and your stylist sends personalized looks right to your door. Stitch Fix. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
To my stylist.
This look is dedicated to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Queen Carvania stood haloed by the morning sun. An army hung on her every word.
My champions, I have sold my chariot on Carvana. 'Twas a lovely SUV, an inexplicably queenly offer. They're even coming to the castle to collect it. Tonight, we feast! An offer you can feast on. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
Thanks for having us.